Trump and the First Lady are set to honor and remember 6 service members who lost their lives in Kuwait last week after brutal retaliatory attacks from Iran. Trump praising the fallen soldiers as heroes. News Nation's Hannah Brandt is live for us at the White House. And Hannah, what do we know about this dignified transfer?
Well, Anna, this dignified transfer is, of course, a solemn event to honor these fallen service members. We're expecting it to either be already underway or to happen any moment now. It's not something that we get to see happen live, but it will be, of course, fed back on camera, and so we'll watch it when it does happen. But the president, we know, is also meeting with the families of those fallen service members at this transfer, as he and, as you said, the First Lady are really paying tribute to the sacrifices that these soldiers made. Other members of the Trump administration also there for that today, including Secretary of War Pete Hegseth. Both the president and Secretary Hegseth.
Hey everyone, welcome back to Dr. John Podcast. So what just happened, guys? While American soldiers are dying in Iran and Trump's poll numbers collapse, Don Jr. and Eric are quietly jet-setting across the globe, cutting business deals with government officials from at least 8 foreign countries, growing the Trump Organization empire while their father makes life and death decisions affecting those exact same nations. This is not a situation where we are reading between the lines.
Have warned these may not be the only service members who lose their lives as this operation in Iran only continues to ramp up. The president saying just this morning that U.S. forces are achieving his objectives in Iran. Take a listen to what he said about that ongoing operation.
And we're doing very well in Iran. You see the result, and it's been amazing. We've knocked out 42 Navy ships, some of them very large, in 3 days. That was the end of the Navy. We knocked out their Air Force. We knocked out their communications, and all telecommunications is gone.
And the president promising even more intense military action is ahead in a true social post just this morning, writing, "Today, Iran will be hit very hard," saying because of the country's bad behavior, he's now considering targeting new areas and groups of people in the country. And Iranian leaders did announce earlier they plan to stop attacking neighboring countries in the region. That's been a big concern as this operation stretches on.
Or connecting dots that require a conspiracy theorist's imagination. This is influence peddling in high definition. This is what happens when you strip away the pretense and admit that the entire operation is a cash register disguised as a government. Foreign governments and multinational business interests have done the math, and the calculus is disgustingly simple. They understand with perfect clarity that if they want a sympathetic ear inside the administration, if they want favorable trade terms or military backing.
But Iran also called President Trump's previous demand for an unconditional surrender, quote, a dream that they should take to their grave, Anna.
All right. And then just to follow up, life goes on and the president is trying to do a lot of things at the same time. President Trump also welcomed several Latin American leaders to the first ever Shields of the Americas Summit today. What more can you tell us about that, Hannah?
Yeah, the president has a very packed schedule this weekend. He was down in Florida this morning for that summit. The White House saying this is all about combating cartels. We know that's been a priority for President Trump and his administration in this term. And this event earlier today did bring together leaders from several Latin American countries, including the leaders of Argentina, Costa Rica, El Salvador, Panama. President Trump urging them during the summit to double down on their efforts to fight drug trafficking, saying really the only way to do that is with, in his view, military force. And this summit comes, remember, just months after the president took unprecedented action in the Southern Hemisphere with that large-scale operation to remove Venezuela's former leader, Nicolas Maduro, in connection, of course, with drug trafficking accusations. Also noteworthy from the summit was the presence of Secretary Kristi Noem. Remember, President Trump just removed her days ago from her role leading DHS. She's set to leave the organization at the end of this month, instead tapping her to be the special envoy for this new Shield of America's effort. Anna?
Yep, and Democrats are taking a victory lap on this one after calling for her removal, too. News Nation's Hannah Brandt reporting live from the White House. Thank you so much for joining us.
Or the diplomatic green light on some regional land grab. The express lane to the president's good graces runs directly through the lobby of a Trump-branded skyscraper. Invest in a Trump property. Partner on a development deal that slaps the gilded name on a foreign skyline. Schedule a friendly chat with Don Jr. and Eric to explore lucrative opportunities. And maybe, just maybe, the country that writes the biggest check finds itself on the receiving end of...
I'm not under any pressure whatsoever. We've never had so much ammunition. Our ships are loaded. I call them locked and loaded. They're locked and loaded. They're ready to go. We have much higher quality equipment than we did when we first started the war.
Hi again, everybody. It's 5 o'clock in New York. While Donald Trump and his administration tie themselves into knots, trying to diminish the impact of the war in Iran on the American people, on our military, on our relationship with our allies, an alarming picture is coming into focus. Contrary to Trump's claim there that America stands, quote unquote, locked and loaded, new reporting finds that the war in Iran has placed enormous strains on the United States munitions supply, a depletion which experts warn could take years to reverse, leaving America and our allies vulnerable to threats from abroad. The New York Times reports this, quote, since the Iran war began in late February, the U.S. has burned through around 1,100 of its long-range stealth cruise missiles built for a war with China, close to the total number remaining in the U.S. stockpile. The military has fired off more than 1,000 Tomahawk cruise missiles, roughly 10 times the number it currently buys.
Preferential treatment when the bombs start falling or the aid packages get signed. This is the most obscene pay-to-play racket ever constructed in plain view. And the truly staggering part is that it is happening right this moment, in the middle of an active shooting war and a presidency that is lurching from one catastrophe to the next. The timing of the whole enterprise is so grotesque it borders on parody. At precisely the moment when tensions with Iran were boiling over,
the Pentagon used more than 1,200 Patriot interceptor missiles in the war at more than $4 million a pop, and more than 1,000 precision strike and ATACMS ground-based missiles, leaving inventories worrisomely low, according to internal Defense Department estimates and congressional officials. The Iran war has significantly drained much of the U.S. military's global supply of munitions and forced the Pentagon to rush bombs, missiles, and other hardware to the Mideast from commands in Asia and Europe. The drawdowns have left these regional commands less ready to confront potential adversaries like Russia and China. A drawdown that has left some of our closest allies vulnerable. The New York Times adds this reporting, quote, in Europe, the war has led to depletions in weapons systems critical for defending the eastern flank of NATO from Russian aggression. That's according to Pentagon information reviewed by the New York Times. The Wall Street Journal adds this reporting, quote, the U.S. has burned through so many munitions in Iran.
When aircraft carriers were being repositioned and the administration was lobbing threats of annihilation across the Persian Gulf, a watchdog organization dropped a report that should have stopped every newsroom dead in its tracks. The report detailed how the president's adult sons were actively expanding the family business footprint by holding official discussions with representatives from 8 different countries, 8 sovereign nations.
That some administration officials increasingly assess that America could not fully execute contingency plans to defend Taiwan from a Chinese invasion if it occurred in the near term, U.S. officials said. Wholly replacing those stockpiles could take up to 6 years, officials said. This threat to our military readiness from a conflict no one has been able to explain to the American people why we are fighting is where we begin the hour. Retired Army Major General Randy Manners back with us. He served as Deputy Commanding General in Kuwait and Acting Vice Chief of the National Guard Bureau. Also joining us, staff writer at The Atlantic and a contributor to the Atlantic Daily Newsletter, Tom Nichols. He is a professor emeritus of national security affairs at the U.S. Naval War College. And back with us, retired U.S. Marine Corps Lieutenant Colonel Amy McGrath is here. She is a candidate for the open Senate seat in Kentucky. General Manor, I start with you. This is something that I think
While the body bags were coming home and the intelligence briefings were flashing red, the boys were in luxury conference rooms talking about hotel management contracts and golf course licensing fees. The visuals couldn't be more nauseating. On one split screen, you have grieving military families receiving folded flags. On the other, you have the president's sons shaking hands with foreign officials and toasting to new revenue streams.
People don't think would get to this point. I mean, I think this is the sort of thing that people like to leave to their government, like to trust their government with keeping in a range that is safe. And it seems that these stories suggest that people inside the military do not think we're in a safe range on these issues anymore.
I completely agree with the assessments by the New York Times and the other investigations that have been ongoing. This is something where we are probably in the lowest state of readiness, quite frankly, probably since 2010, 2012, in that time period. We have been, these stocks will take, I was saying, perhaps 2 years if they accelerate the funding and accelerate the assembly lines and so on, and make huge investments in our through our defense contractors.
The campaign narrative about putting America first has never rung more hollow. The only thing being put first here is the quarterly profit margin of a family business that has turned the White House into its personal sales department. What makes this entire saga spiral from merely unethical into outright confessional territory is the public admission that tore down the final remaining shred of a firewall. During the first term, there was at least a theatrical performance of compliance.
But the reality is we are dangerously low on these ammunitions. No matter what the president says, it is complete propaganda. And it also bothers me when he says our ships are fully stocked, locked, and loaded whenever the U.S. mail is being rejected by the military since April 7th, and our men and women in uniform in the Middle East are not even getting mail for the past 3 weeks.
Why is that? Explain that.
The quote from that I have been able to find is, logistic necessities are prohibiting mail from being delivered. Well, that's crap, quite frankly. In wartime, the most important thing you can get is a package from home, whether it is cookies, whether it is toiletries that you can't get on board ship or you can't get locally. It's just that idea that it's a touch of home. My dad was in Vietnam, wrote to my mom every day, and my mom wrote to him as well. It kept him going.
Trump stood at a podium and declared he was handing the keys to the business over to his sons. There were trust documents drafted by attorneys who presumably got paid by the hour to create a Potemkin village of separation. It was always a sham, a paper-thin illusion designed to give moderate senators just enough cover to avoid an impeachment vote on emoluments violations. But now, the charade has been officially retired. In a moment of breathtaking candor, Eric Trump went on the record and dismissed those prior safeguards as completely and utterly pointless.
Even though we have email and the internet, the reality is getting a package from home is very important. And here the administration does not take into account the morale of our men and women that are in combat and has suspended all mail deliveries since April 7th. And it's even on the USPS website that they're all suspended.
Tom Nichols, let me come back to the reporting on our readiness and on the depletion and the draining of our supplies. Times adds this: the Pentagon has also moved sophisticated air defenses from Asia to bolster protection against Iran's drones and rockets. The redirected weapons include Patriot missiles and interceptors from South Korea, the only Asian ally hosting the advanced missile defense system deployed by the Pentagon to counter North Korea's growing missile threat. Now, for the first time, the system's interceptors are being moved away, according to American officials. I guess I'm old enough to remember the little Rocket Man chapter of Trump 1.0, and I know he went on to fall madly in love with Kim Jong-un and to write love letters and share those love letters. But that doesn't change the nature of the North Korean regime. And I wonder if you can just speak to our exposure and the fact that it is very public, how exposed the United States is in Korea, in Taiwan, and around the world.
A futile waste of effort. His words essentially amounted to a shrug and a declaration that, this time around, they aren't even going to pretend. The mask has not just slipped, it has been incinerated. What you are witnessing is an open, unapologetic admission that the family intends to monetize the presidency with zero inhibitions, and they are daring the entire legal and political establishment to do a single thing about it. When you start looking at the list of foreign nations involved, the implications spiral out in a dozen different directions.
I wish I could say something comforting, but I'm going to now say that it's worse than you think. Because the danger here is not just that we're drawing down stocks of weapons for a war that we didn't need to be fighting. I think one thing that Americans should ask themselves is when they hear these reports is to say, and for what? Because this was completely unnecessary. But more to the point, not only do our opponents know that we're draining our stocks, but they've had a good look at our wartime leadership. And they have seen us, our civilian leadership. They've seen the operational excellence of the U.S. military, but that only takes you so far when the civilian leadership is so utterly incompetent. And that worries me almost more than the drawdown in stocks, because I'm concerned that our allies think that they are facing the weakest.
All of them disturbing. The full registry of which specific countries were represented in those meetings hasn't been entirely unsealed for public consumption, but logic dictates the gravity of the conflict. If any of those 8 nations maintains a strategic interest in the Iranian conflict, we are looking at a direct collision between national security and private profit.
And most disorganized and most incompetent American leadership in decades, maybe ever. We have an unstable president. I just want to emphasize something General Manner just said about propaganda. It's worse than propaganda when Donald Trump says we have all the weapons we need and they're the best. It's worse than that. He doesn't know. Donald Trump has no idea how many weapons we have, whether they're any good. He just says stuff like that when he's asked questions because he needs to say that everything's fine. The president of the United States does not know what he's doing. He's an unstable person, and the people he's relying on below him, starting with the Secretary of Defense, are incredibly incompetent. His negotiating team is his son-in-law and a real estate developer. The Secretary of State.
If the Trump organization is taking meetings with nations that are desperate for military hardware or economic concessions, every single handshake is tainted with the specter of a quid pro quo. If the foreign officials sitting across the table from Eric and Don Jr. have any business pending before the United States government while their father sits in the Oval Office, that's not a conflict of interest. That's the definition of a compromised command structure.
Is somewhere, but apparently not deeply involved here in trying to resolve this situation. The director of national intelligence is virtually invisible at this point. No one seems to know what she's doing. And if I were a foreign opponent, I'd be looking at this and saying this is, singularly the most incompetent American regime we've ever faced, and they're burning through their stocks. I suppose the only good thing to note here is that the Chinese and the Russians are probably intelligent enough not to interrupt Trump while he's doing this much damage to our national security and to our national defense. But when you take those numbers that you've been reading, Nicole, and you add to that this war is being directed by people who are, making a complete hash of it.
8 countries represents a systematic business model. This isn't one wayward interaction that can be memory holed by a press secretary. This is a deliberate repeating cycle of using presidential proximity as a magnet for foreign capital. The financial numbers leaking out from this enterprise are the kind that bend the brain and reveal the sheer scale of the grift. Major outlets have tracked the flow of capital and reported that the family business.
We are putting ourselves in an incredibly dangerous situation.
Well, let me ask you, we are in, or we would like to be in a negotiation with Iran. Why would Iran negotiate with us if the current path is depleting and weakening us more than any negotiation could?
Well, the Iranians are clearly showing that they have a higher pain tolerance right now than we do. And I suspect that they have every incentive to drag their feet to drag this out. Because that increases the economic damage that's going to reverberate throughout the American and Western economies. In a sense, Donald Trump is, while he's done an immense amount of damage militarily to the Iranians. He has not destroyed the regime. He has not destroyed all of their military capacity.
Is raking in a fortune during the second term. We are not talking about a few $1,000s in licensing fees that slip under the radar. When you aggregate the totality of the new construction projects, the branding agreements, the overseas capital investments, and the management contracts, you are staring at a mountain of cash that reaches into the hundreds of millions. Foreign investors are not naive philanthropists.
And he's handed them the ability to choke off the strait and to affect our economy. So, the question is, why would the Iranians negotiate? Great question. I suppose the answer is they don't really have much of an incentive to, especially because all of Trump's body language seems to indicate that he doesn't want to restart this war, that he doesn't want to start major combat operations again, even though, again, he says it. He says that if they don't negotiate, he'll do terrible things. But I think you can only say that so many times before you're the boy who cried wolf. So, again, all in all, it's this war has left us far worse off than if we had never started it in the first place.
They are not sinking that kind of capital into a Trump property because the projected occupancy rates are attractive. They are paying a massive luxury tax for access. The real return on investment for a foreign state isn't calculated in rental yields. It's calculated in presidential policy shifts. The hotel suite or the golf course villa is just a receipt for a favor. And here is the cold, hard truth of international deal-making. The foreign governments are fully aware of how this game is played. They are willing to overpay for assets. They are willing to enter into financially irrational contracts because the profit motive is secondary to the political leverage. The money is just a conduit to the president's ear. Amidst this whirlwind of crass money-making, there has been a persistent side narrative attempting to suggest that perhaps the apolitical branch of the family is trying to flee this radioactive chaos. The speculation around the youngest son has been a favorite parlor game for pundits hoping to find a sliver of moral distance within the dynasty. The theory being pushed was that he was utterly mortified by his father's behavior, that he was pulling a quiet rebellion and distancing himself from the family brand. The evidence brought in to support this wish casting was thin gruel. There was a minor scheduling incident where he was offered a role as a delegate in the Florida political machinery and politely declined. The gossip industrial complex immediately declared this a grand gesture of defiance. Yet the official explanation was so mundane it barely qualifies as a news story. He had prior commitments. A college-aged young man had classes, exams, and a life that pre-existed the delegate invitation. Reading anything more into that is a psychological projection on the part of people desperate to believe the family is fracturing. In fact, quite the opposite is being broadcast by the matriarch herself. In a revealing conversation that dropped just as the war coverage was peaking, the First Lady explicitly dismantled the ashamed son fantasy. She detailed how her son is deeply attuned to modern politics, trading insights with his father about current events and strategy. The portrait she painted was not one of a kid hiding in a dorm room with a hoodie pulled over his head, pretending his last name is different. She described a young man who is aware, who is engaged, who is actively conversing with the president about the political landscape. And then, to put a visual exclamation point on the entire rebuttal, he appeared at the marquee address to Congress. He walked into the chamber, took his seat in the family box, visible to the entire world and the swarm of cameras. In that moment, the narrative of shame evaporated. You do not sit in the most politically charged spotlight in the country if you are trying to run away from your father. You sit there to send a message of solidarity. It was a silent, steely-eyed proof of life for the dynasty. This brings us back to the central apparatus of the family unit. Don Jr. has fully transformed into the political battering ram, the digital crusader, the flame-throwing surrogate who thrives on triggering the libs and keeping the base in a perpetual state of righteous fury. He's on the social platforms hammering the critics. He's in the field revving up the rallies. And he's simultaneously the lead rainmaker for the business side. Those two identities are completely fused. His political notoriety inflates his business value. Foreign officials don't just see a developer's son, they see a kingmaker who controls the pulse of a radicalized political movement. His business success, in turn, funds the lifestyle and the network that amplifies the political noise. It's a closed loop of power and profit. Eric, on the other hand, has taken a quieter, more surgical approach. He has become the operational backbone, the one who actually reads the balance sheets and knows the square footage of every atrium in the portfolio. He's the quality control manager for the corruption, ensuring that the deals are structured in a way that maximizes the premium foreigners pay to play. His comment about ditching the ethics scaffolding wasn't a gaffe. It was a mission statement. It was a declaration that the second term would not be burdened by the cosmetic compliance that slowed them down during the first. The dynamic that unifies all of them is a breathtaking resistance to shame. There exists a deeply held wish among the opposition that the Trump family must, on some private level, be crumbling under the weight of their own toxicity. The hope is that behind closed doors, they are humiliated by the scandals, that the court cases and the constant stream of violent rhetoric have turned the family into a pressure cooker of regret. But the observable reality directly contradicts that. We are seeing a family that is doubling and tripling down on every behavior that the ethics community finds objectionable. They aren't slinking into the shadows. They are leaning into the sunlight. They are more publicly supportive, more financially intertwined, and more blatantly exploitative of the presidency than they ever were before. They have recalibrated their internal moral compass, or, more accurately, they have smashed it entirely. The only metrics that matter now are the size of the bank transfer and the proximity to the throne. The mechanics of this international influence peddling are chilling in their precision. Picture the scenario from the perspective of a foreign leader. Country X has a discomforting issue with sanctions, or perhaps needs the umbrella of American military hardware to deter a regional rival. They have two paths forward. The traditional path is a bureaucratic slog. They hire K Street lobbyists at a massive retainer. They request meetings with State Department desk officers who are overworked and wary, and they submit position papers arguing the policy merits. They might wait 6 months and get a polite diplomatic shrug. The other path is faster and far more lubricated. They contact the Trump Organization. They propose a partnership on a gleaming new tower in their capital. They offer a licensing deal that guarantees a massive annual royalty. They invite Don Jr. and Eric to an exclusive red carpet visit, where the hospitality is lavish and the photo ops are flattering. In the course of those meetings, nobody needs to explicitly state the bribe. The air is thick with the unspoken. The foreign nation has just bought a vested interest in their success. The president's children now have a financial artery running directly into that foreign economy. When a decision comes across the Resolute desk that affects that country, the president isn't just balancing geopolitical strategy, he's balancing his family's bottom line. The founders of the Republic literally fought a war to escape this kind of monarchical profiteering, and here it is, reincarnated in a tailored suit. The Emoluments Clause, that dusty piece of constitutional parchment, was drafted for exactly this circumstance. The founders possessed a vivid fear of foreign entanglements and the corruption of sovereign decision-making. They envisioned foreign crowns slipping gold into the pockets of American officials and wrote a specific prohibition to stop it. And yet, for 2 terms, that clause has been treated by the Trump legal apparatus as a rough suggestion rather than a constitutional pillar. The refusal to divest, the refusal to release tax returns that would map the full extent of foreign liabilities, and the explicit decision to let the sons operate a massive private equity vessel while receiving state secrets all represent a fundamental assault on the framework of anti-corruption law. The legal battles over these violations usually stall out in procedural limbo because the system was designed for gentlemen who would feel a sense of dishonor when caught, not for operators who view the law as a speed bump. The human cost layered on top of this financial gluttony is what really burns. You have American infantry units deployed in hostile territory, taking fire, losing limbs, and making the ultimate sacrifice. Their families are back home, clutching dog tags and staring at flags that feel impossibly heavy. They are living through the agony of a war that the commander-in-chief launched. And at the height of this conflict, the commander-in-chief's sons are essentially using the conflict as background noise for their corporate expansion tour. They are in VIP lounges discussing square footage and licensing percentages, while the notifications on their phones probably carry the same headlines about American KIAs that are making Gold Star families weep. It is a level of sociopathic detachment that is difficult to square with any notion of patriotism. Service, sacrifice, and solemn duty have been replaced by transaction, profit, and branding. The disconnect defines the Trump era. The family that asks for the blood of the nation's youth refuses to sweat a single drop of its own. And what is Don Jr.'s specific role in this morally bankrupt interplay? He has weaponized the grieving process. He stands on stages and bellows about supporting the troops, using their courage as a rhetorical shield while simultaneously leveraging their deaths as a backdrop for a business expansion. He attacks the media for questioning the war while simultaneously signing the paperwork that turns foreign anxiety about that war into personal profit. He is the bridge between the raw emotionalism of the MAGA base and the cold, clinical accumulation of intergenerational wealth. Eric's contributions are less visible to the rally crowds but far more intricate in the financial architecture. He is the one ensuring that the foreign money doesn't just arrive, but that it stays and compounds. He manages the physical assets, the branding quality control, and the legal structures that obfuscate the true origin of the funds. They have divided the labor of the family business brilliantly. One son farms the political rage, the other farms the foreign cash, and the patriarch converts the chaos into electoral power. The attempt by the media ecosystem to paint the youngest son as a silent dissenter is one of the stranger psychological quirks of this news cycle. It stems from a desperate, almost primal need to find a crack in the armor. The theory that the 20-year-old college student was too pure for the family business and was staging a quiet walkout was never supported by the facts. The Melania interview was the kill shot to that theory. She described an intellectually curious young man who engages with his father on policy and politics, who follows the news cycle, who is a product of his environment rather than a refugee from it. His presence at the State of the Union, where protocol and body language are scrutinized more heavily than anywhere else on the planet, was the definitive proof. He didn't look down, he didn't hide, he stood in the box, clad in a suit, representing the next generation of the dynasty. The pundits who projected their own moral compass onto him were left with nothing but silence. This reveals a deeply uncomfortable truth that the opposition still struggles to process. The Trump family is not a tragic, broken family torn apart by ambition. They are a cohesive, highly effective business unit that is fused with the machinery of the federal government. They enjoy being around each other. It seems so, at least when their interests align, which they do perfectly. They are a syndicate where the political capital reinforces the financial capital, and the financial capital funds the lifestyle that keeps the political base engaged. Every dollar Eric makes on a Saudi Arabian Gulf deal or a Southeast Asian condo licensing fee is a dollar that subsidizes the lifestyle of a family that can then afford to project the winner image that Don Jr. sells to the masses. Every political victory by Don Jr. that keeps the Republicans scared and loyal ensures that the congressional oversight of Eric's deals remains anemic. It's a mutual protection racket. The implications for the midterm elections and beyond are profound because it forces a recalibration of the corruption attack line. The Democratic strategists who think they can simply run ads about the emoluments clause and watch the independent voters flock to the polls are likely misreading the room. The base has been immunized. Years of scandals have created an antibody response. They view business success not as a conflict of interest, but as a prerequisite for leadership. To them, the image of Eric dismissing ethics rules isn't a confession of crime. It's a display of strength. Why would a billionaire follow the rules designed by the deep state? That's the logic. However, the true political danger for the Trump camp lies not with the base, but with the exhaustion of the persuasion vote. The suburban voters who are already queasy about the war, who are tired of the daily psychological whiplash, they look at the sons making millions while gas prices soar and body bags arrive, and they feel a visceral revulsion. That revulsion doesn't need to be aimed at winning over a MAGA rally. It just needs to suppress turnout enough to flip a swing district. The money trail itself is a labyrinth designed to resist sunlight. Because the Trump Organization is a privately held entity, the accounting ledgers are locked away tighter than the nuclear codes. We can see the exhaust. We can see the Trump-branded cranes rising in foreign capitals. We can see the real estate filings in counties where international holding companies suddenly snap up parcels adjacent to Trump properties. But the exact percentage of the kickback, the exact nature of the favorable loan terms, or the debt guarantees provided by foreign state banks Those remain in the shadows. This opacity is the safety blanket of the entire scheme. As long as the public can't trace the exact dollar for favor ratio, the family can maintain plausible deniability. They can call it normal business. But there is no normal business where a political leader's children are simultaneously the primary beneficiaries of foreign state hospitality. The size of the deals turns the presidency into a price point. If we calculated the actual presidential premium on a Trump property versus a non-Trump property in the same market, we would likely see the statistical definition of graft. This brings us to the psychological core of the Trump ethos, the total rejection of sacrifice. Historically, families of wartime presidents have fallen over themselves to demonstrate shared hardship. They've visited field hospitals, they've enlisted, they've planted victory gardens. The tradition was built on the understanding that leadership requires a symbolic sharing of the burden. The Trump doctrine is the absolute inversion of this. The doctrine states that the leader's family should achieve the highest possible standard of opulence while the commoners carry the rifles. Eric's statement about futile ethics is the key to unlocking the entire philosophy. The idea that a president should sacrifice any private business gain for public service is seen by this family as a sucker's game, a weakness to be stamped out. They view the presidency as a limited time only asset, a rare window where the brand value spikes astronomically, and in their view, only a fool would waste that moment on modesty. The family's solidarity, therefore, is not just a happy coincidence. It's a pact. It's an unspoken agreement that they will all ride this rocket as high as it can go. Melania, often painted as a reluctant figure, has her own platform and financial interests that are fully intertwined with the political operation. The son, who is still in the educational phase, is being groomed within a bubble where the standard rules of ethical restraint simply do not exist. He is coming of age in an environment where foreign governments are seen strictly as clients, where the Justice Department is an annoyance, and where the roar of a rally crowd validates every excess. He is not ashamed. He is being indoctrinated. The family unity is their shield. As long as they stand together, they can frame any attack as an attack on the American family. The ultimate verdict on this era will not be written by the journalists covering it daily, at least not entirely. It will be written by historians sifting through the bank records and the diplomatic cables decades from now, and what they will find will be shocking in its simplicity. They will find a direct correlation between foreign policy decisions and the cash flow of the president's private conglomerate. They will see a war that enriched the ruling family not through defense contractor stocks, but through the literal branding of luxury condos. The fact that this is happening currently, not in a historical textbook but on our live feeds, is the true tragedy. We are so saturated with scandal that the most textbook case of presidential corruption ever devised by a real estate developer just scrolls past as another notification. We are watching the looting of the American brand in real time, facilitated by a family that has convinced half the country it's just smart business. And make no mistake, the deal with Iran, the trade wars, the tweets, and the rallies, it's all a distraction for the only thing that has ever mattered to this family. The next licensing fee, the next foreign deposit, the next asset that proves they are winning. The sons aren't ashamed. They're too busy counting. And as long as their father holds the keys to the federal government, the cash register will never stop ringing.